Hey guys, so today's topic of conversation is a little different than my normal content, but there is some overlap that I want to address. I want to talk about this whole Roblox situation. There's a few things that I want to address. The first is that I really think that we are kind of coming into a space of acknowledging the lack of digital literacy that we have and education that we are giving, especially to our young kids. Right? The internet is a space where there is a lot of risk for our children, and we have to be having upfront conversations with our kids to be able to keep them safe. Okay? For those of you who don't know, my name is Kelsey. I am a spicy educator, a somatic sex and intimacy coach, and I specialize in alchemizing trauma and conditioning into pleasure. Let's get into it. So how this relates with my industry, you guys, is I deal with things more from the trauma perspective, right? And so unfortunately, a lot of the conversations that I have are for people that have already been put in really awful situations, right? And they're recovering and they have survived it, and now we're working through the healing process, right? But one of the things that I am starting to become more and more passionate about is how do we prevent the trauma from happening in the first place, right? What conversations can we be having? What gifts can we potentially give to our next generation? And just like having age-appropriate conversations around the body, around sex education, right? Now we need to start having the conversation of digital literacy on top of that, because there is so much overlap on how we keep these kids safe. And unfortunately, you guys, while I would love to be able to hold the big guns accountable and these big corporations accountable, and I think it's possible, right? That's not my area of expertise, to be honest, on what exactly the solution is. And you guys know me, I try to focus on being very solution oriented, right? If we're not going to get that from the tech giants, if we're not going to get that from these organizations, then what other things can we put in place to keep our kids safe, right? And it is conversation, right? It is connection. It is a regulated nervous system that we're not just shoving technology in our kids' faces, right? I cannot tell you how many times when a kid is crying or they're angry or they're throwing a temper tantrum or they're fussing at the dinner table, all I kind of see is the tech getting shoved into their faces, right? Having the conversations of how to properly support them in emotional regulation, which is something that we talk about in my industry, what I do with adults, right? Having these conversations with kids, right? Starting to have, again, age appropriate, right? We don't need to fearmonger. We don't need to traumatize them inadvertently by having these conversations, right? That's not what we want to do at all, right? There is a very big difference between having education, right, and going the big GR process, right, and desensitizing them. That's not what we want to be doing, right? That also puts them in very vulnerable positions. But really starting to have these conversations, right, and starting to bring ourselves back into the present moment as best we can to go, of recognizing when our kids are dysregulated and how to help them through that and how to process that rather than shoving tech at them. And I'm not saying that kids shouldn't have access to technology, right? But proper safeguards, right? And things that you can also be doing as parents, right? To help put extra protections in place for them so that we don't have maybe as many kids at such a high risk for predators being able to get to them, right? I think it is very telling the way that Roblox is handling all of this. If you guys have been paying attention to, I think the content creator's name is Schlepp. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. A couple of his posts have come up on my feed as this has become a very big topic of conversation from those of us that look at this from a trauma lens, right? And being like, oh my gosh, we have like a whole other like can of worms that we're going to be dealing with that we want to try to get ahead of and we want to try to get in front of so that we're not just continuously having this trauma loop cycle over and over and over again And, you know, when this generation is old enough, again, they're back in with us for severe trauma responses because they have been abducted, because they have experienced traffic stops, right? All of the things that a lot of people want to bury their heads in the sand that it doesn't exist. And unfortunately, I think that current political climate should tell us exactly that, yes, it exists. And it is right in our front door, right? It is in every single one of our local neighborhoods that we need to be paying attention to, right? I don't have all of the answers. I would love to start this conversation of how other things that we think that we could do. There are a couple of people that I would love to reach out to collaborate on this, that I think this is a little bit more their wheelhouse, and I'm loving what they're doing as far as parent education on how to empower parents and empower kids in, you know, this new realm of the digital era that we've kind of really kind of snowballed into, right? The way that technology has changed just in the last decade. I mean, it is snowballing and rapidly, right? And so these conversations, right? I know, like, when I was a kid, right? There were so many things that we were having conversations about. I'm like, hey, if somebody says that they have a bunch of puppies in a van, what do we do, right? It's like, oh, we don't go that way, right? I don't know that those conversations are happening in healthy ways from a digital literacy perspective. And I think it is something that would be oh so beneficial and oh so advantageous to get ahead of that, so that we're not accruing another generation of just more and more trauma that I think we have some real power to prevent if we can look at things with open eyes, right? And I would love anybody that has any conversations to be having with the big tech giants, right? Because to be honest, I think it's a load of crap that they're not. I think it's definitely possible. And again, this is not my wheelhouse. This is not my area of expertise. But if I were to bet on it, I would say it's absolutely possible. And they are actively choosing to police adults who are consenting to the content that we are sharing, rather than actually putting protections in place for our kids, right? I can't tell, like, it's in the way that I'm having to go about phrasing certain things on this post right now, right? Because heaven forbid I try to educate on ways to help prevent trauma and kind of unveil the situation on, like, how serious it really is and how many people are actually experiencing this level of trauma. See, that's a really big problem for me, right? So this is just another conversation that I would love to have. Drop your resources. Tell me your opinions. Tell me who you're following as far as people that are having these conversations, specifically when it comes to digital literacy.